mountain there. And both sides built entrenchments every time they stopped. This is kind of a new thing. Now we're starting to morph into almost a World War I style combat, minus the machine guns and the airplanes and whatnot. But in the past, armies didn't do this. If they were on the move, they just fought. But now they move, they build trenches. Then they move again, they build more trenches. Confederates joked that the Federals marched with a rifle in one hand and a shovel in the other. And the Federals countered. They said, well, the rebels seem to carry their breastworks with them. In other words, it's just every time we stop, within just no time at all, boom, you've got breastworks. There's another engagement on June 14th at Pine Mountain, and poor old Bishop Polk is killed at this battle, so Leonidas Polk is out of the picture. On June 27, Sherman was getting tired of all this maneuver and trench and maneuver and dig. He says, all right, we're going to just try the old-fashioned frontal assault. He orders an assault on the Confederate forces at Kennesaw Mountain. And as we know, frontal assaults generally don't work, especially when you're going up a mountain. Although, again,
Chattanooga accepted. But,
yeah, Chattanooga was an exception to the rule. I think Sherman was hoping that for a repeat of Chattanooga, but it didn't happen. Johnston easily repulsed the attack. He caused the Yankees to have 3,000 casualties compared to only 600 for the Confederates. So 5-1 casualties there in favor of the Confederates. One soldier in the Confederate Army said, the Federals seemed to walk up and take death as coolly as if they were automatic or wooden men. You know, it's just amazing to me to think of the heroism of these men. They're ordered to make these suicidal charges, and they do it for the most part. They just do it. They march up there and they do it like it's their job. I mean, I don't know. I would tend to want to disappear, run away. I mean, some people did that, of course, but not most. All right. July 2nd, Sherman flanks Johnston's army again, forcing it to retreat. Johnston sends message to Atlanta, ordering the evacuation of Atlanta's hospitals and munitions factories. So the handwriting is on the wall. Johnston realized we need to start getting people out of Atlanta. July 9th, a week later, Sherman crosses the Chattahoochee River. Johnston and his army retreated to a defensive position just outside Atlanta, just north of Atlanta. Many Confederates believed that Johnston had just given up too much ground without a fight. And they saw this as a pattern. Again, we talked about the martial spirit of Southern men, and they thought a lot of them thought this is dumb. We're just retreating and retreating. It's cowardly. We need to go attack. And during this retreat, the Confederates had lost 15,000 men. So a lot of people are criticizing Johnston, saying all this retreating and you still lose 15,000. Chaos breaks out in the city of Atlanta. People flee the city for safer environs. In the previous year, Atlanta's population had decreased from 20,000 to only 4,000. And almost everybody left in the city were white women and slaves. You might have had a few elderly men, white men, maybe some kids, but there weren't a lot of men of fighting age left.
Because they were probably on the front or part of the war effort at this time?
I would say so, yeah, or they had gotten the heck out of Dodge, or got the heck out of Atlanta in this case. Johnston and the army constantly built entrenchments, as we saw. Sherman wrote in frustration, he said, the enemy must have 50 miles of connected trenches. The whole country is one vast fort. And finally, on July 17th, under pressure, there's mounting pressure to get rid of Johnston yet again. Poor old Johnston, he's just always being fired. He's like the Billy Martin of the of the Confederate Army. For our listeners that don't know, who's Billy Martin? He was a manager of the New York Yankees who I think got fired 5 times, but brought back 5 times, or at least 4 times, right? But anyway, so, I mean, Johnston is fired again. Davis removes him from command, and he replaces him with the aggressive John Bell Hood. Hood had lost the use of an arm at Gettysburg and a leg at Chickamauga. His leg was gone all the way up to the top, up to the hip. And so when he got in his horse, he had to be lifted into the horse and strapped in. He had been scheming, I must say, behind Johnston's back to get his job. Hood really wanted to be in charge of the whole thing. He thought, okay, when I'm running this thing, we're going to quit all this retreating. We're actually going to fight like men. And we'll see how that works out. By the way, this makes the other surviving Corps commander, General Hardee. It makes him very upset because he was senior to Hood. He thought he should have had the job. It's like, where are we putting in this lower ranked guy? He later requested a transfer. He's going to stick around a little while, but he's going to be transferred, and eventually he leaves the Army in disgust. But he founds a really good fast food chain, which to this day has great hamburgers.
Oh, yeah. I should have followed my instincts, because when I saw the name Hardy, I wanted to quip, oh, like the restaurant with the monster burger. But I thought, no, that's ridiculous. I shouldn't say anything. But yeah, no, in my little town in Iowa, we had a Hardee's. It's the poor man's Carl's Jr., if you want to look at it that way.
Yeah, we don't have them in Houston, but they've got them in other, like North Texas. But I'm kidding, listeners. He did not found. There's no connection between General Hardee and the Hardee fast food.
Sorry, everyone. You know, they didn't
really. It should have been the case, but it's a little. Yeah, fast food's still got a while before it.
Yeah, sorry, everyone. We're looking about a century, maybe 1940s, 1950s, but no fast food chain. So if you were wondering, no, it's not there.
No, maybe it's a great grandson or something. Who knows? Well, all right, so we're getting real close to Atlanta.
Yeah, we're going to gear up for the battle. And like you said earlier, this is very interesting that this is something that the Civil War is credited with, this rapid evolution of tactics, where one way to respond to Napoleonic tactics, take a drink, that no longer work in the 1860s is to build these trenching techniques that for really the rest of the 19th century, up to the World War I, where they're famously a fixture of that war, and it seems like you have to waste 10,000 lives to get 4 inches of soil. This is a big part of it. But how does this all come into play for the Battle of Atlanta? Can you set the stage there?
Sure. So now we've got, as I mentioned, Johnston is gone. General Hood has taken over as the Confederate commander. He's getting a lot of pressure from Jefferson Davis and other Confederate leaders to go on the offensive. Okay, again, the thought was all this retreating, all this defensive stuff is not manly. This is not how Southerners fight. When we fight, we attack. So Hood is told, go on the offensive. And he didn't need a lot of pressure because he was a very offensive-minded general, as we will see. All right, Sherman is advancing toward Atlanta in 3 columns. There's, as we mentioned earlier, he has 3 separate armies. He's commanding what we would call today an army group. He sends McPherson to go around to the east and attempt a turning movement. That's the Confederate right. So again, if we set a mental map, it's very simple. Just think of 2 lines going from left to right. The Confederate line on the bottom, the Union line on the top, stretching from east to west or left to right on a map. And they're just north of Atlanta. The Confederates are just on the outskirts. July 20th. Hood decides to go on the offensive. He sends 2 corps against Thomas's army, which is on the Union right. That is the west side of the battlefield, or left. And they clashed at the Battle of Peachtree Creek. And this does not go well. Again, we've said this again and again, but let me repeat it once again, and I'll probably say it many more times before we're done. But generally speaking, in Civil War combat, the attacker loses, or at least the attacker has more casualties. And that holds true here. After this Battle of Peachtree Creek, there are 2,000 Federal casualties, but 2,500 Confederate casualties. And it was a draw. Nothing is accomplished. The Hood does not push back the Federal Army one bit. So then he tries something else. He's going to try to flank the Union left, which is the east or the right side of our mental map. He sends Hardee on a long 15-mile march toward the extreme Union left. But the Union is not fooled. McPherson realizes what's going on, and he attacks. The 2 sides clash on July 22nd at what is called the Battle of Atlanta. And it's confusing because there's actually 3 battles here in rapid succession that, as a group, basically caused the fate of Atlanta. But for whatever reason, they call this one of the 3 the Battle of Atlanta. It's really just part of the Battle of Atlanta. But it's because it's essentially in Atlanta or very close to Atlanta. This battle, again, is indecisive like the first one at Peachtree Creek. This time, it's really bad for the Confederacy. Hood's army suffers 8,000 casualties. The Federals only have 2,000. So, yeah, that's, when you're outnumbered, as General Hood was outnumbered, you don't want to be throwing away 2,000 here, 8,000 here, 4,000 here that you can't afford. He's bleeding himself to death. However, I will say this. It's kind of like Chancellorsville in reverse, because General McPherson is mortally wounded and he dies soon after the battle. So this talented, promising young officer is taken out of the picture, and he's succeeded by a man named Oliver O. Howard, who was not nearly as talented as a commander. Sherman was very upset about McPherson. He loved McPherson, so did Grant, and he wept openly. You don't picture Sherman crying in front of people, do you? He was a pretty tough customer. And even General Hood grieved about it. When Hood found out about it, he was very upset. He had been McPherson's roommate at West Point. Okay, another one of these great ironies. These two roommates, and now they're fighting each other, and one of them ends up ordering what amounts to the death of the other one. Hood later wrote, "I will record the death of my classmate and boyhood friend, General James B. McPherson, the announcement of which caused me sincere sorrow." So yeah, really tragic loss. He was very young. I think he was only about 30, but that's a big blow to the Union. Okay, so these two battles that we've mentioned just outside of Atlanta, Peachtree Creek and the Battle of Atlanta, they did halt Sherman's advance, at least for a while, so they weren't completely pointless, but they were very, very costly. It was, if it was any kind of victory for the South, it was a Pyrrhic victory. All right, July 25th through 27th, Sherman shifts the entire army westward. He just moves everybody over, kind of like in football when you go in motion and you're trying to confuse the other team by moving your guys around. He's trying to get a better position. He's trying to get around to the south. Hood decides to hit the Federals while they were in motion. So Hood orders an attack on Howard's army. Howard, again, is the army commander who replaced McPherson. It takes place at Ezra Church. But again, the Federals anticipate this, and they threw back the attacking Confederates. And the Confederates lost 3,000, another huge loss, but the Federals only lose 600. So with each one of these battles, these crazy, I don't know, I shouldn't say crazy, but let's say reckless, over-aggressive attacks that Hood is conducting, he's shooting himself in the foot. The battle was a failure, but it did prevent the Federals from cutting the rail lines from Atlanta. So these three battles together, Peachtree Creek, Atlanta, and Ezra Church, they destroy the offensive capability of the Confederate Army. Between the three battles, plus some other skirmishes, Hood loses 20,000 men. Remember, he only had about 80,000 to start with, so that's 25% of his army. Sherman was pleased. He says, "I'm glad when they attack, for the advantage is with us." Go ahead, please, by all means, keep hitting us. Sherman finally orders a bombardment of the city, and it lasts 5 weeks. And by late August, about 30,000 shells had landed in the city of Atlanta. That's just amazing, 30,000. Afterward, Sherman sends a force around south of the city to cut the rail lines, and Hood sends a couple of corps to stop them on August 31st at the Battle of Jonesboro, but they fail. And now Hood is forced to evacuate. He's got to leave Atlanta, otherwise he's going to have his supply line cut and his army is going to be surrounded and starved to death. So Hood and his army evacuate the city of Atlanta on September 1st and 2nd. And they burn or they blow up everything of military value before they leave. Sherman marches into the city, which is in flames, and a lot of the things that they might have been able to take for military use are gone. Sherman takes over on September 2nd, and Sherman wires Lincoln. He says, "Atlanta is ours and fairly won." And this was a huge, huge morale booster for the North. The fall of Atlanta probably, well, let me back up a step before I say that. We are, in a future episode, we're going to be talking about what's going on in the East. During all this time, there's a lot of fighting going on between Grant and Lee, and a lot of fighting and a lot of Union deaths. And so the North as a whole was starting to get very depressed, and the anti-Lincoln movement was ramping up. There's about to be an election. But the fall of Atlanta, probably more than anything else, saved Lincoln's reelection hopes.
Yeah, in the next episode, we'll look at the election of 1864, because this is probably the Confederacy's greatest hope, that the war effort becomes so demoralizing to the North that a Democrat wins and they're able to hold on to the Confederacy. We'll also look at the march into Tennessee and then Sherman's march to sea. But just a little bit of post-game analysis. We're mixing our sports metaphors all over the place.
I know people are probably thinking, man, I didn't know this was a sports